Imagine being a young mother with newborn twins, standing in the rain, begging your own parents for help, only to have the door slammed in your face. This is Emily's story. A story of heartbreak, survival, and discovering that real family isn't always the one you're born into. Stay with me because what happens next will break your heart, and then put it back together again. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. I used to believe my life would always be ordinary, quiet, and safe. I never thought tragedy would come knocking on my door so soon. My name is Emily Carter, and I grew up in New York, not the glamorous Manhattan side of the city you see in movies, but the quieter suburbs just outside. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved at you when you drove by, where families sat on their porches in the summer, and where you could hear kids laughing in the yards long after the sun went down. When I met Daniel Carter, I was only 19. He was tall, with a warm smile and a voice that always made me feel steady, even when I wasn't sure of myself. We fell in love in the most natural way, through conversations that lasted until sunrise, long walks by the Hudson River, and shared dreams about the future. Daniel wasn't rich, and neither was I. But he had something better. An honest heart and a determination that made me believe we could get through anything as long as we were together. By the time I turned 21, we were married. It wasn't a big wedding, just close friends and family gathered in a little church. I remember holding his hand at the altar, thinking, this is it, this is home. I wasn't wearing a fancy dress, and he wasn't in an expensive suit, but our vows were real, and that was all that mattered. The early years of our marriage weren't easy. We lived in a small apartment with creaky floors, and sometimes we struggled to pay the bills. But Daniel always reminded me that money wasn't what defined us. We had love and we had each other. That was enough. And slowly, little by little, things got better. Daniel found steady work in construction, and I worked part-time while taking evening classes, hoping one day I'd become a nurse. We dreamed about starting a family. Sometimes late at night, Daniel would place his hand on my stomach and whisper, "One day, Em. One day, we'll have little ones running around here." I used to laugh and say, "Just promise me you'll help change the diapers." He'd grin and nod. Every single one. When I finally found out I was pregnant, Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "We're going to be parents," he whispered. And then, when the doctor told us it wasn't just one baby but two twins, we laughed until we cried. Daniel immediately started talking about how he'd need to learn to juggle bottles and diapers at the same time. I told him he'd better get used to less sleep. It felt like the world was opening up for us, brighter and fuller than I ever imagined. But life has a cruel way of turning joy into heartbreak. I was 8 months pregnant when everything changed. It was an ordinary morning. Daniel kissed my forehead before leaving for work, just like he always did. "I'll be home for dinner," he promised, smiling as he picked up his lunchbox. I watched him walk out the door, never once imagining it would be the last time. That evening, instead of his familiar footsteps coming up the porch, there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped, thinking maybe he had forgotten his keys. But when I opened it, 2 men stood there, both wearing hard hats tucked under their arms, their faces heavy with sorrow. My stomach dropped before they even spoke. "There was an accident," one of them said quietly. "Emily, we're so sorry. Daniel didn't make it." I can't even describe the way the ground seemed to vanish beneath me. My ears rang, my chest caved in, and I couldn't breathe. My hands clutched my belly as if holding on to the babies would keep me from collapsing. But nothing could stop the wave of pain that tore through me. My Daniel was gone. The days that followed were a blur. I remember people coming and going, the funeral, the endless stream of condolences, but none of it felt real. I was 24 years old, carrying 2 babies inside me, and suddenly I was a widow. I cried until my body was weak, and still the tears kept coming. Just a few days after the funeral, the contractions started. My body was exhausted, my heart was broken, but there was no stopping it. At the hospital, after hours of labor, I finally held my sons in my arms. Noah was born first, small and fragile. his tiny fingers curling around mine. Then came Liam, his cry strong and determined. As I looked at their little faces, I felt a flood of love so powerful it nearly broke me. They were beautiful, innocent, perfect. And yet, they would never know their father's embrace. I whispered to them through my tears, "I'll protect you. I'll give you everything I have. I promise." But deep inside, fear gnawed at me. How was I going to raise 2 babies alone? When we left the hospital, I went to the people I thought I could lean on. My parents, Susan and Richard Miller. I stood at their doorstep, my arms aching from carrying the twins, my body still weak from childbirth. I was trembling, but I believed with all my heart that they would take me in, even just for a little while. When my mother opened the door, for a brief second, I thought I saw softness in her eyes. I whispered, "Please, Mama. I don't need money, I don't need much. Just a roof over our heads until I can figure things out." But then her face hardened. She shook her head slowly. "We raised you already, Emily. We're not raising you and 2 babies now." Her words sliced through me like a knife. I thought maybe I had misheard, so I tried again, desperate. "I'll find work. I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me some time." But my father's voice came from the living room, sharp and cold. He didn't even look at Noah and Liam. "They're just another burden. We can't afford that." My knees almost buckled under me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were their grandsons. Tiny, innocent babies who had just lost their father. But they didn't even care enough to look at them. I begged, "They're your grandbabies. Please." But there was no warmth, no compassion. My mother folded her arms and said flatly, "You made your choices. Now live with them." Then she shut the door. I stood there in the night air, clutching Noah and Liam to my chest, my tears falling onto their blankets. My heart shattered all over again. Death had taken my husband, but it was my own parents who delivered the cruelest betrayal. In that moment I felt truly abandoned, alone, with no one to turn to. Or at least that's what I thought. Because I had no idea that the family I had married into, the Carters, Daniel's parents, would become the very people who saved me, the family I never knew I needed. And that is where my story really begins. After my parents shut that door in my face, I stood outside for a long time, not knowing where to go. The streets felt colder that night. I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance, and somewhere down the block a dog barked. But all I could really hear was the sound of my own heart breaking over and over. I looked down at Noah and Liam. They were both sleeping, their tiny chests rising and falling so softly. They had no idea what kind of storm had just passed over us. To them, the world was still safe. To them, all that mattered was being held, being fed, being loved. I whispered through my tears, "I'll find a way, babies. Somehow I'll find a way." But in that moment I didn't know how. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion and panic. I stayed in a small rooming house for a while, using what little money Daniel and I had saved. It wasn't much, just enough to cover a few nights. I barely slept because the boys woke up every couple of hours, crying for milk, needing to be changed, needing to be rocked back to sleep. My body was still healing, my mind was drowning in grief, and yet I had no choice but to keep going. Sometimes I'd sit in that tiny room with peeling wallpaper and whisper to myself, if Daniel were here, he'd know what to do. He'd know how to make this better. But Daniel wasn't there. All I had were his old work boots in a bag, the smell of his jacket, and the 2 babies he had left behind. One evening, as I was rocking Noah while Liam lay against my chest, I realized the money was almost gone. I had maybe one more night in that room. Panic surged through me. I thought about going back to my parents and begging again, but I couldn't. Not after the way they looked at me. Not after the way they called my boys a burden. I couldn't put myself, or them, through that humiliation again. That's when my mind turned to Margaret and Henry Carter, Daniel's parents. I hadn't been close to them before. They lived in a quieter part of New York, a little upstate, where the houses had big yards and people actually knew their neighbors. Margaret was gentle, with soft eyes and a way of speaking that always made you feel calmer. Henry was quiet, the kind of man who didn't say much but showed his heart through actions. Daniel used to say, "My dad isn't a man of many words, but he'll fix your car, build your porch, or shovel your driveway without you even asking." At the funeral, they had hugged me and kissed the babies' foreheads, but grief kept all of us a little distant. Everyone was lost in their own pain. At the time, I didn't really think about leaning on them. But now, as I held my twins and felt the walls closing in around me, I realized they were the only family I had left. Still, fear held me back. What if they saw me the way my parents did? What if they thought I was weak, or worse, that I was just another responsibility? I almost talked myself out of calling them a dozen times. But as I sat on the edge of that bed, tears streaking down my face, I remembered something Daniel had said once. "No matter what happens, Mom and Dad will always have my back. And they'll have yours too, Em." I clung to those words. And with shaking hands, I dialed their number. When Margaret picked up, her voice was soft. "Hello." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with emotion. Finally I managed to whisper, "It's me, Emily." There was a pause, and then her voice grew warm. "Oh, sweetheart. How are you holding up?" That simple question unraveled me. I broke down, sobbing into the phone. I told her about losing the apartment, about trying to manage on my own, about being turned away by my parents. My words came out in broken pieces, but Margaret listened to every one of them. Then she said, firmly but kindly, "Pack your things. You're coming home." "Home?" I repeated, unsure I had heard her right. "Yes, Emily. Home. Yours and the boys. You are not alone in this. Daniel may be gone, but you are still our family. And we take care of family." I cried again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely lost. The next day, Henry drove down in his old truck. He knocked on the door of that run-down rooming house, and when I opened it, he didn't say a word at first. He just looked at me, my tired face, my trembling arms holding Noah and Liam, and then he gently took the bags from my hands. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you home." The drive to their house felt like crossing from one world into another. The city noise faded, replaced by quiet streets lined with trees. When we pulled into their driveway, Margaret was already on the porch, waiting. She rushed down the steps, arms open, and for the first time in weeks I felt safe. She kissed both boys, her hands trembling with love. "Look at them," she whispered. "So perfect, so beautiful. Daniel would be so proud." I couldn't stop crying. I tried to apologize, to explain that I didn't want to be a burden, but Margaret stopped me. She held my face in her hands and said, "Emily, listen to me. You are not a burden. These babies are not a burden. You are family. And family takes care of each other. Always." Her words sank deep into my heart. After so much rejection, so much pain, I finally felt wanted. That first night in their home, I slept in Daniel's old room, the one he had grown up in. The boys were tucked into little bassinets Margaret had set up. As I lay in the bed, I looked around at the posters still hanging on the walls, the trophies on the shelf, the photographs of him as a boy. It was bittersweet, painful because he wasn't there, but comforting because I was surrounded by the pieces of his life. Margaret and Henry didn't just give me a place to stay. They gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. They woke up in the middle of the night to help with the babies, rocking them when I was too tired to stand. Henry fixed up an old crib from the attic, sanding it down until it looked brand new. Margaret cooked warm meals, sat with me when I cried, and reminded me gently that grief was not something I had to carry alone. Days turned into weeks, and slowly I began to breathe again. I would sit on the porch with Margaret, rocking one of the twins while she held the other. Sometimes we'd talk about Daniel. His goofy laugh, his stubborn streak, the way he used to hum while working on projects. Other times we'd just sit in silence, listening to the wind in the trees, letting the quiet soothe us. Henry wasn't a talker, but he showed his care in the little things. One morning, I found he had built a changing table out of scrap wood from the garage. Another time, he came home with a second-hand stroller, cleaned and fixed up until it looked almost new. He never made a big deal about it, but every action whispered the same thing: you're not alone anymore. I realized then that love doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes it comes from the people who step in when others walk away. Margaret and Henry became more than in-laws. They became the parents I never had, the grandparents my boys desperately needed, the safe place that caught me when I was falling. And as I began to heal in their home, a new thought took root in my heart. Maybe I could still build a future. Maybe life wasn't over after all. Life inside the Carter home soon found its rhythm. It wasn't easy, not by any stretch, but there was love in that house, and love makes even the hardest days bearable. The twins were my world. Noah was the quieter one, always watching with wide, thoughtful eyes, while Liam had a stronger cry and a little spark in him, as if he was determined to let the world know he was here. They kept me busy day and night, but no matter how tired I was, one look at their tiny faces reminded me that every sacrifice was worth it. Margaret often said, "These boys are Daniel's legacy." She'd hold them close, her eyes filling with tears. "He's still with us, Emily. Every time they smile, every time they breathe, a part of him lives on." I clung to that thought. It was the only thing that made the weight of Daniel's absence a little lighter. The first few months were the hardest. Nights blurred into days, and I often felt like I was moving through fog. Grief doesn't leave just because life demands you keep going. It lingers, pressing on your chest when you least expect it. Some nights I would rock Liam or Noah to sleep, tears slipping down my cheeks, whispering, "Your daddy loved you so much. I wish he was here to see you grow." But I wasn't alone in that grief. Margaret and Henry carried it with me. They didn't just share their home, they shared their hearts. One morning, I came into the kitchen to find Henry sitting with Noah on his lap, gently humming an old tune. It startled me because Henry wasn't the singing type. But in that moment, I saw the depth of his love. He wasn't just a grandfather. He was stepping into the role of a father figure too, filling spaces none of us expected him to. Margaret was my rock. She taught me how to bathe the babies, how to swaddle them so they'd sleep longer, how to rest whenever I could. But more than that, she gave me courage. "You're stronger than you think," she'd say whenever I doubted myself. "You're going to raise these boys into fine young men. And you're not doing it alone." Her faith in me planted seeds of strength I didn't even know I had. As the months passed, I began to think beyond survival. Daniel and I had always talked about me finishing nursing school, and even though he was gone, that dream still whispered to me. At first it felt impossible. How could I manage school with 2 babies? But Margaret encouraged me. "Education is a gift, Emily. Don't give up on it. We'll help with the boys." And they did. When Noah and Liam were almost a year old, I enrolled in a local nursing program. It wasn't easy. My days were packed with classes, studying, and endless diaper changes. Some nights, I thought I couldn't keep my eyes open another minute. But then I'd remember Daniel's voice, full of pride, saying, "You'd make an amazing nurse." That memory pushed me forward. Margaret and Henry stepped in as babysitters, cheerleaders, and quiet heroes. When I had late-night study sessions, Margaret would stay up with me, brewing tea and quizzing me on medical terms. Henry would carry the boys around the yard, pointing at the trees and birds, as if teaching them the world itself. Slowly, a new version of life began to form. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was growing. The boys grew too, fast and full of life. Their first steps brought laughter into the house. Their first words, "Mama" and "Papa," filled our hearts with joy. Margaret cried when she heard Noah say "Nana" for the first time. Henry tried to hide his smile when Liam reached for him and called him "Papa" too. Those little moments stitched new hope into our lives. But grief never vanished completely. There were days when it hit me out of nowhere. Hearing a song Daniel loved, seeing a father playing with his kids at the park, or stumbling across one of his old jackets. Sometimes in the quiet of night, I'd still whisper to the empty space beside me, I miss you. And yet, alongside the grief, there was gratitude. I was grateful for Margaret's gentle wisdom, Henry's quiet strength, and the way they loved Noah and Liam as if their hearts had doubled in size just to hold them. Years passed in a blur of diapers, bottles, textbooks, and exams. By the time the boys turned 4, I had completed my nursing degree. I remember standing on that stage in my graduation gown, my heart pounding with pride. Margaret and Henry were in the front row, clapping and crying, holding Noah and Liam on their laps. After the ceremony, Margaret hugged me tightly. "Daniel would be so proud," she whispered. And for the first time in years I believed it. Working as a nurse brought new challenges but also new meaning. Every patient I cared for reminded me of why I had chosen this path. I understood pain, loss, and fear in a way textbooks couldn't teach. And I carried that empathy into every hospital room. The Carters celebrated every milestone with me. When I bought my first car, Henry inspected it inside and out, making sure it was safe. When I landed my first steady nursing job, Margaret baked a cake and decorated the kitchen with balloons. When Noah and Liam started school, they both cried right alongside me, waving as the boys disappeared into their classrooms. Our little family wasn't traditional, but it was strong. Stronger than I ever imagined when I stood outside my parents' door years ago, rejected and broken. Looking back, I realized something important. Family isn't just blood. Family is love, loyalty, and showing up when it matters most. Margaret and Henry didn't owe me anything, but they gave me everything: shelter, support, and unconditional love. I thought I had lost my world when Daniel died. And in many ways I had. But in the ashes of that loss, something new was born. Home, family, future. And just when I thought we had found our peace, life tested us again. Because one day, out of the blue, my parents, the ones who had turned me away when I needed them most, decided to walk back into my life. And their return would stir up wounds I thought had healed, forcing me to face the past I had tried so hard to leave behind. For 6 years, I lived in the safety of the Carter home. 6 years of raising my boys, building my career, and slowly stitching together a life that felt whole again. I had buried the pain of my parents' rejection deep inside. I told myself it didn't matter anymore. I told myself I had moved on. But sometimes, even when you've closed a door, life has a way of swinging it wide open again. It happened on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. The boys were outside in the yard, chasing each other with little toy airplanes while Henry watched from the porch. I was in the kitchen with Margaret, helping her prepare dinner when the knock came. It was firm, familiar, and it made my stomach drop before I even opened the door. When I pulled it open, there they were, my parents, Susan and Richard Miller. The same parents who had shut the door in my face when I was 24 and holding newborn twins. The same people who called my children a burden. Froze. My heart pounded in my chest. For a moment I couldn't breathe. "Emily," my mother said softly, her eyes scanning me up and down as if no time had passed. "It's been a long time." I didn't answer. My throat was dry. My father stood behind her, his expression unreadable. "We came to see you," he said gruffly. Then after a pause, "And the boys?" The boys. The same boys they hadn't cared to hold as babies. Before I could respond, Noah's voice rang out from the yard. "Mama, look." He ran up, airplane in hand, Liam right behind him. They both stopped short when they saw the strangers at the door. "These must be your sons," my mother said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Our grandsons." She bent slightly, as if expecting them to run into her arms. But Noah and Liam stayed close to me, their small hands gripping my legs. They didn't know these people. I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to shout at them, to remind them of the night they turned me away. But Margaret appeared beside me, her hand gently resting on my shoulder. "Emily," she whispered. "Breathe." So I let them in. Not because I wanted to, but because I was too stunned to do anything else. We sat in the living room, the boys clinging to me, Margaret and Henry sitting stiffly across from Susan and Richard. The air was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, my mother said, "We've made mistakes. We see that now." I laughed bitterly. "Mistakes? You abandoned me when I needed you most. You left your daughter and 2 helpless babies out in the cold." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We weren't ready, Emily. We didn't know how to handle it. But things are different now." Different. That word stung. Because nothing about what they had done could ever be undone. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. Silence stretched before my mother spoke again. "We've been struggling. Money's tight. Health hasn't been great. We thought maybe we could stay here for a while. Help out with the boys. Be a family again." The truth hit me like a punch. They weren't here for me. They weren't here for Noah and Liam. They were here because they needed something. I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and sharp. "You didn't want to be a family 6 years ago. Why now?" My mother's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Shame, maybe, or just desperation. "We've learned from our mistakes," she said. "We just want a chance to make things right." But Margaret spoke before I could. Her voice was calm but firm. "Making things right means showing up when it matters, not when it's convenient." The room went quiet. In the days that followed, my parents tried to force themselves into our lives. They brought little gifts for the boys. Cheap toys, boxes of cookies, as if those could erase the years of absence. They told stories about how they had always thought about them, conveniently leaving out the part where they refused to even look at them as infants. The boys were polite but distant. Children may be young, but they aren't blind. They knew who had been there for them every day of their lives. Margaret and Henry. They didn't need strangers pretending to be grandparents now. Still, guilt gnawed at me. They were my parents, after all. The people who had raised me, who had fed and clothed me as a child. Was I heartless to push them away now? Was I cruel to deny them a second chance? One evening, after the boys were asleep, my father cornered me in the kitchen. His voice was low, almost threatening. "You owe us, Emily. We gave you life. Don't forget that." I stared at him in disbelief. "You think I owe you? For what? For shutting the door in my face? For calling my children burdens?" His jaw tightened. "We're still your parents." "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "But you stopped being my family the night you turned me away." He didn't respond. He just walked out, leaving the words hanging in the air. I cried that night, torn between anger and sorrow. But as I sat there in the dark, Margaret came and placed a hand on mine. "Emily," she said gently, "you don't owe anyone your peace. Especially not people who tried to break it once already." Her words gave me strength. The next week my parents showed up again, this time during a family gathering. Henry's sister was visiting, and the house was filled with laughter, stories, and the smell of Margaret's cooking. When Susan and Richard walked in uninvited, the room went silent. They acted as if nothing had ever happened, smiling, hugging people, calling Noah and Liam their precious grandsons. It was too much. I stood up, my hands trembling, my heart pounding. "Stop," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room fell quiet. "You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to walk in here and pretend you've always been there. 'Cause you weren't. You weren't there when I was broken and begging. You weren't there when Noah and Liam took their first steps, spoke their first words, started their first day of school. You weren't there for anything. And you don't get to act like you were." My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. The people who stood by me were Margaret and Henry. They are the ones who picked up the pieces when you walked away. They are the real grandparents. They are the real family. My parents' faces fell. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but the truth was undeniable. Everyone in that room knew it. For the first time, I didn't feel like a scared daughter trying to earn my parents' love. I felt like a mother protecting her children. And in that moment, I knew exactly where my loyalty belonged. After that gathering, things could no longer go back to silence. I had said the words out loud, words that had lived in my heart for years. There was no hiding anymore. My parents didn't take it well. For the next few weeks they kept showing up. Sometimes they came with smiles, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with anger. It was like they were trying every trick in the book to force their way back into my life. The boys hated it. They grew nervous whenever the knock came at the door. Noah would ask, "Mama, are they coming again?" And Liam would cling to my hand. They didn't know the whole history, but they knew enough. Those people weren't safe. Not safe for me, not safe for them. One evening I was tucking the boys into bed when Noah whispered, "Mama, why don't they leave us alone? We already have Grandma and Grandpa." His words pierced me deeper than anything my parents had ever said. Out of the mouths of children comes the purest truth. He was right. We already had family. We didn't need more, especially not people who had abandoned us. But still a small part of me ached. These were my parents. I had once wanted nothing more than to make them proud. As a little girl, I dreamed of growing up with their guidance and love. To let go of them completely felt like cutting off a piece of myself. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. I had just finished a long day at work when I found my parents waiting outside the school where I was picking up the boys. They were standing by their car, umbrellas in hand, waving like they belonged there. Froze. The boys spotted them too, and immediately, Liam squeezed my hand tighter. "We just want to talk," my mother called out over the rain. "Please, Emily." I hurried the boys into the car, my heart racing. My father stepped closer. "Don't you think they deserve to know their grandparents? You can't keep them from us forever." Something inside me snapped. I stepped out into the rain, water soaking my hair, my clothes sticking to my skin. For once, I wasn't afraid of confrontation. "You think you're entitled to them?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "You think you can walk back into my life after 6 years and demand to be called grandparents? You weren't there when they cried at night. You weren't there when they were sick, when they needed love, when they needed family. You weren't there for me when I was drowning. So no, you don't get to claim them now." My mother's face crumpled, but my father's eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the storm around us. "The mistake was yours. And I won't let you hurt them the way you hurt me." I got back into the car and drove away, the boys silent in the back seat. My hands were trembling, but inside something shifted. I had finally said what I needed to say. When we got home, Margaret was waiting at the door, worry etched on her face. I told her what had happened, every detail. She listened quietly, then pulled me into her arms. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "Sometimes protecting your children means closing doors you wish had been different." Her words gave me peace. From that day forward I set boundaries. My parents tried a few more times, but I didn't open the door. I didn't take their calls. It wasn't out of cruelty, it was out of love. Love for Noah and Liam. Love for myself. Over time the attempts stopped. They faded back into the distance, the same way they had disappeared once before. Only this time it wasn't their choice. It was mine. Years passed. Noah and Liam grew into strong, kind young men. They thrived under the love of Margaret and Henry, who never missed a school event, a birthday, a milestone. They were there for scraped knees and broken hearts, for baseball games and late-night talks. One day, when the boys were in their teens, Liam asked me, "Mama, do you ever miss them?" Thought about it. I thought about the parents I wished I had, the love I longed for as a child. "Sometimes," I admitted softly. "But then I remember we have everything we need right here." Because the truth is, family isn't always about blood. Family is about love that shows up when it's hardest, about hands that hold you when you're falling, about people who see your worth when the world doesn't. And in the Carter home, I had found all of that and more. Looking back now, I realize my story isn't just about pain and rejection. It's about survival. It's about finding light in the darkest places. It's about choosing love over bitterness, hope over despair. My parents may have given me life, but Margaret and Henry taught me how to live it again. And Noah and Liam, they gave me purpose, strength, and joy beyond measure. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the family we create is far more powerful than the one we're born into. And that truth has set me free.